He spoke an incomprehensible language, with equations on the board. He said things that either seemed to be nonsense or were extremely difficult to understand. And of course, uh, this was described as a discovery in pure research, something that had no real technological, but only ideological viewpoint. And it's unfortunate that this certainly was mainly the creation of the mass media. This is how they described it. But we can't absolve Einstein himself. To a certain extent, he did feed into it in a very ambiguous way. In some of his writings, and he wrote a lot for the uh, popular writings, What is Relativity is a popularization. He actually reinforced that, saying explicitly that science is going to move from inductive, from observation-based, to purely deductive, to creating theories based on just mathematical consistency, basically the way the universe just had to be. Um, and although he emphasized it was a joke, his, soundbite in which he was asked, what would have you done if the observation did not confirm your theory? And he said, I would feel sorry for the dear Lord. The theory is right. He meant it as a joke, but there was the kernel that this is the way he had calculated that this is how the universe must be. So observations must conform to it. Now, if you read other of his writings, he explicitly contradicts this. He says, this is pretty much an exact quote, all science must derive from observation. So you had these two sides to Einstein himself, but the net effect of him and the mythologizing of him and his approach to general relativity recreated very suddenly, overnight, this alternative viewpoint, which had been totally discredited by the scientific revolution, starting back with Galileo hundreds of years before, because this was the attitude of Ptolemy, that by pure reason, we can derive what the universe must be like, and we use observations to simply tweak the theory, as people would say, to correct the theory, to create the epicycles, so as to ex post facto draw the theory back into accord with observations that have already been made. So basically, this is a model that inverts the scientific method. Instead of predicting something that will happen in the future and then testing the theory against those predictions, you assume the theory and then make it fit observations that have already been occurred, which is a fundamental difference. As I'm fond of saying, it's like the difference between riding an airline in which the airline says, we guarantee that in 99.99% of our flights, you'll get across the Atlantic safely. And an airline that says, well, our last 13 flights have all crashed, but we knew after the fact why it was that they crashed, and we corrected that error. So which airline would you fly? The scientific method airline gets you across the Atlantic, or the Ptolemaic method airline, which explains the crashes after they've occurred. You can read about it in your obit. This incident enormously revalidates the older pre-scientific mathematical method.
Hey,
So,
really quick, a quick aside
yeah.
with that. How much do you think that we can attribute this to the the mass movement away from church orchestrating society? Like it seems like a mathematical shaman or the priest class of mathematicians rising up in the 20s might in some way be directly tied to the loss of popularity of the church institutions as like this organizing principle in people's lives. It's almost like a power vacuum for the spiritual mysticism that perhaps the church used to carry the banner of. But now people go looking for that, and inevitably they turn to the scientists, and the scientists are happy to do it because why not?
Well,
It's a fun job, I guess.
no, I think it was much broader than that. I mean, uh, in my book, I quote one of Einstein's biographers, Dr. Pais, and he gives a sort of good sociological. I mean, this is immediately after uh, the World War and the pointlessness of the World War and its tremendous loss of life and destruction had very much demoralized wide sections of the society because it had totally discredited all of the existing institutions without really, for most people, creating something in its place. Obviously, for socialists, communists, the extreme left, the model of the future was the Russian Revolution, which had occurred 2 years previously. But for many people, there was no certainty. Authority had been destroyed, all authorities, secular and religious. You also had, of course, at this actually still occurring in 1919, the flu epidemic, further destabilizing everybody. So what Pais said was, yeah, Einstein, this notion that the mass media pretty much created, the idea of a priest who you could trust but not really understand, uh, that became a very appealing notion and was part of, you know, the resonance of the Einstein phenomena.
Our videos come out of LPPFusion's research in fusion energy, which will power a future with abundance for all, with a clean, sustainable economy and environment. Goods, housing, and infrastructure would be extremely affordable once fusion kicks in. Fusion energy is the key to an advanced future. Support fusion research. The link's in the description. And thanks.
It seems like the mass media must have been tapping into some zeitgeist, though. Like they knew that that was going to be a banger headline. Like they knew people wanted that really badly. They wanted
Well,
they love that. Like people love black holes. My students, like I can,
right, but
they love dark matter. They love dark energy, and you can explain to them alternatives that are much more physical and mundane. But at the end of the day, they still want to know, like, what's it feel like in a black hole? You
right,
know?
right. This is, yeah, this what was Pais had a very good phrase for it. The idea of simultaneously being explained something and being told you can't understand it. The appeal of mysteries. And, the Catholic Church knew about the appeal of mysteries. Oh, how can God be one and three at the same time, his own son? This is a mystery. Yeah, it has
The
an
original
appeal.
wave particle duality.
But, you know, uh, the newspapers, even though, you know, it is part of the modern epoch, the beginning of the 20th century, and the newspapers had immediate feedback. They could see that, they had the street sales as the immediate feedback that they could read the next morning in their sales. I mean, of course, they did have subscription. Most of their sales were streets. So this was a story that was selling. And you can see, and I point out in my book, how the story evolved. Because the first reaction to this quote, which did not originate with Einstein, but with another scientist, that only 12 people in the world could understand general relativity. The initial editorial reaction at the Times, so they were writing editorials about this, was this seems pretty unfair. This is such a big thing and only 12 people can understand it. Can somebody explain it to the rest of us? So that was their initial reaction. But within days, it came that they were celebrating this mystery, that, this is something that can only be known to a tiny number of people, that can only be understood.